So today we're going to do our deep dive, spoiler heavy discussion about The Batman, the latest movie by Matt Reeves. But we're going to go even deeper than that because Batman is something that's been around for 80 years and we keep coming back to it. Why is that? Well, we're going to talk about that today and why I think Batman is a specifically American mythology about the American culture. There he is.
There you are. How's it going, Dr. G? Doing good?
Doing good. Doing
Uh,
good. Got some bat thoughts today.
so I'm assuming you did your spoiler free. We should pretty much
Yes,
say right here, right now, that this is very much a spoiler review, discussion, conversation.
absolutely. Spoiler heavy. You've been warned,
Yeah, yeah.
internet people. So Batman, the Batman. Um, I'll just describe real quick. The basic premise, you go from, it's about year two, I believe, and there's a serial killer killing people, calls himself the Riddler, and the majority of the story is Batman and Gordon trying to track down who the killer is, and the end result is a big showdown between the Riddler's followers and Batman. That's the basic structure. But man, is there so much jammed into this movie. Um, what are your thoughts of this film?
I don't know if you could tell I'm a big Batman fan.
Picked up on that.
Yeah. We both are. I know. As soon as you watched it, you asked me if I'd seen it, and I'd already seen it 2 times. And you've seen it 3 times. I've seen it 3 times now. And yeah, I really enjoy the film. I'm a big fan of Detective Comics. I'm a big fan of what kind of the core of what Batman was or is. And I'm really happy with a lot of what they did. I'm not so happy with some of the other stuff, but I don't think that's really that important because at the core of it, I thought this movie really did the character justice in terms of being a detective. I loved it. I loved the story.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I was a fan of the Tim Burton film way back in the day. Saw it in the theater. I wasn't a big fan of the sequels so much. Especially, I never even saw Batman and Robin. I just heard it was so bad that I never bothered with it.
Yeah.
So, but then Batman Begins for me was like the ultimate,
Yep.
up to that point, cinematic depiction of Batman.
Yeah.
And of course, I love the Nolan trilogy. Thought it was great. Rewatch Batman Begins last night just to kind of prepare for this.
Yeah.
And I noticed, as much as I loved the Nolan trilogy, there's something about this new version that's even better. And that's very, if you know me, that's very high praise.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm a huge fan of that trilogy. Absolutely love it. But Matt Reeves, he has done something here truly special, I think, and it has to do with was a number of different choices I think that he made that have allowed him to really get into the bones and the meat and potatoes of what Batman really is about.
Mm-hmm.
Get into, but so like, what did you think, for example, of the casting?
Well, all right. So first off, I know what you mean in terms of this being like, for me, the Nolan trilogy really exemplified, I thought, a like really coherent and real through line for the character.
Yeah.
I think he did it. The character analysis and the kind of depth that Nolan and Christian Bale must have like gone into in order to kind of create that trilogy. I'm hoping I see something similar with Matt Reeves and Robert Pattinson. I thought the casting was, I think the casting was great. I think the character for where he was at here is clearly going to evolve in whatever, you know, kind of subsequent films that they do, because one of the biggest grievance I hear a lot of people talking about in this film is like that he's so brooding, and there was really no difference between Bruce Wayne and Batman, right? In terms of like their emotion, right? He's very kind of just angsty all the time, and I think that was that was for a reason, right?
Oh, yes. You know, they're calling him emo Batman and all that sort of
yeah.
But yes, I agree that in fact, I know it was deliberate, because I've seen interviews with the cast and with the director, and they talk about that. And they talk, Pattinson talks about how in other iterations you see Bruce Wayne as the, you know, smiling billionaire playboy goofing around, and they said for this one, he's not figured that out yet. He's still seriously traumatized by the death of his parents, shot right in front of him. He blamed himself, all of that stuff. And so he's created this persona to try to, this Batman character, to try to process the trauma, but he's still seriously messed up.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah.
And so his story is about, you know, traversing that, transcending that to some degree. We're already getting into the psychology of it, but yeah, that was deliberate. That was totally deliberate. And I think it absolutely works for me, especially after having watched Batman Begins, which at the time was seen as so dark and gritty. It's like, it's playful by comparison. There's a lot of humor in Batman Begins, that is. And again, it's nothing against Batman Begins. I absolutely love that film. I've seen it a bazillion times. I adore it, but it's less serious than the Batman is. It's almost like, you know, every couple of years we get a darker, grittier Batman, you know, and if you thought the last one was, check this one out, you know, so forth. Now in the comics, they already went through all this, and they've got versions of Batman that are just so ridiculously dark and gritty. It's silly. It's self-parody, and it's like just too much. But I think Reeves and Pattinson and the whole gang have just absolutely nailed just the right amount of tone. There's still some humor in there, but it's never jokey, or it's certainly never like Marvel, where they just throw jokes in there just for the heck of it. And even if it undermines the story and the characters somewhat, but they don't do that at all here. Like, you know, a couple of things, you know, come to mind would be when Batman is in Selina's apartment, he looks down and you got a lot of cats, you know. It's just deadpan, you know. And then even then she comes right back with, I have a thing about strays, and that one line tells you tons about her character.
Yeah.
That she feels like a stray. We learn out later that she is, and that her reaction to that is to try to take them in and take care of them. Right. So that tells us a lot about Selina, and just that one little line there. Trying to think what else. He's definitely dark and broody, you know.
Yeah.
Even at the beginning of the film, you have that, you know, with the voiceover, which I really like that too, because it gives it that film noir thing. Like, they really lean into that with this film. And he's talking about how he's become a nocturnal creature.
Yeah.
And then when he goes up to visit with the accountants with Alfred, you know, the sunlight's glare is bothering him, so he has to put shades on, you know. But then that scene is reflected at the end of the movie, where he looks straight up at the sky and in the sunlight, and he's not squinting anymore.
Yeah.
So a nice little bit of visual storytelling there. There's a ton of that in the movie.
I thought I thought Pattinson did great. I think Zoe Kravitz did great. I really liked Colin Farrell's Penguin. I thought he was superb.
He just chews on the scenery every time he shows up. You're just like, I can't wait to see what this guy does next.
Yeah. He was probably he's one of my favorite parts of the movie. But I think casting in general was amazing. I really, really, really enjoyed how the character of Gotham came through, because in previous films, you know, I did enjoy Burton's. I did like Batman and then Batman Returns, because Gotham had character, right? And it was very gothic and all that stuff. And then
other fantastical and over the top delivery.
Right. And then Joel Schumacher's, it just became like a caricature of like this megalith, like mega city type thing, and it was interesting, but there was no seriousness in it whatsoever.
Right.
Begins, I really enjoyed what Begins was initially in terms of Gotham, because it was a lot grittier, and I would say more comic book than the Dark Knight and then the Dark Knight Rises.
Yeah.
Like when he's in the Narrows, you can just see how decrepit in Begins, you can see how decrepit Gotham was, and how just corrupt everything was. With this one, you really that is just completely hammered home. Like, why would anyone want to be living in a city like this?
Yeah.
Right? It's
The whole place is
horrible.
narrows.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. The entire city is it's just seeping with it was depressed. Like the entire city was really, really depressed.
Yeah.
It
It's
was
drenched,
yeah.
literally drenched. Like it's raining nonstop. Like
Yeah.
it's very much like Blade Runner, that feel.
Yeah.
I mean, if I'm not mistaken, I think Nolan actually had his crew watch Blade Runner for inspiration. And I think he said, I want Gotham, at least this part of it, to look like this, and he did. But what Reeves has decided that he's just going to lean into that whole hog, and the whole place looks like that. The whole place is it's very claustrophobic and jammed. There's stuff everywhere. And everything is just dripping in shadows, except for some neon lights here and there to give you some contrast. The way that Batman is presented is different from previous iterations too. He doesn't jump around as much. He's not as agile as Christian Bale's version, for example. He's not flying around as much. He just sort of menacingly shows up from out of the darkness and stares people down, and they just pee themselves and run away, or they get their butts kicked hard. And I love what Pattinson does with his eyes here. He conveys all of this emotion with very little effort. So I mean, kudos to him for that. I saw this funny meme. It was saying that he prepared for the role by being known as the guy who was in Twilight. That was to help prepare him for being dark and depressed.
Right. Yeah.
But I think he's put all that stuff behind him pretty much.
Yeah.
So you mentioned we were talking a little bit about Catwoman. I think Zoe Kravitz did just a fantastic job. But she had a lot to work with here. Normally it's Catwoman just sort of this slinky sex object character and doesn't add anything except just sex appeal. But here they gave her an arc. They gave her complexity. So she had a lot to work with. She's able to fight, but they don't go overboard with that. Like if she was fighting against Batman, it's like, come on, give me a break. We just saw him beat up 19 guys, right? So even as great as a fighter as she probably is, she's not gonna be able to really make push him to the limits at all. He just sort of pins her. But then of course they become allies, which is a great dynamic.
Yeah, it reminded me a lot of, not necessarily Catwoman in films, but comic books, right? Like this film it very much stuck with what was coming through with the source material. Like I was reminded of Batman Year One, Batman Year Two, Long Halloween, a little bit of Batman Hush, Batman Eternal, like all these comic book series, these arcs, these graphic novels. There was a lot there. And I felt like, the chemistry between her Catwoman and Pattinson's Batman was phenomenal. Like it was a lot like you see in the comic books, which is, you mentioned that scene where he's looking down and all the cats are there. Yeah. And that's the kind of comedy that comes through in the comic, because you'll just be reading it and like this black mass of a human being, right? Just garbed in tactical gears, just looking down, and these little cats are meowing at him. He's like, you have a lot of, like, it was straight up, it felt like something that was straight up taken out of the comics. And I felt like the rapport and their relationship in the movie really exemplified that a lot. Yeah.
Definitely.
Yep.
So here's another thing I like about this is the relationship between him and Gordon.
Mhm.
You really, I don't think we've seen that done like this in film before. You had like with the Nolan trilogy, you really got to dive more into Bruce Wayne's character. That's in this too, but not as much.
Mm.
More, I think it's more about the detective work and and I love the sort of buddy cop thing that they've got going on in this movie, and absolutely love Jeffrey Wright as Gordon. I thought he just nailed it so well. And his discussion about the choices that he made for the role is really interesting too. We'll get to that. We'll get to that when we start analyzing it, because I think he saw a lot in the Batman story that I have, as far as like its mythic overtones.
Mm.
But in this, he described himself, the actor did, as always playing everything as if he were just completely overwhelmed all the time.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I think he definitely conveys that. But there's also just this great classic noir detective, you know, cynical but with a heart of gold, and world weary but still wants to do good. It's just so classic. There's a scene where he and Batman are questioning Penguin, which I love that scene because it's just three fantastic actors, and Gordon is just rapid fire throwing the theories at the Penguin, you know, and it's this gravelly kind of voice, and see, it's like this, ain't it? It's like that, yeah, see, you know what I'm saying? I'm like, man, this could have been, you know, right out of a, you know, old gangster movie or something like that.
Right.
But it's so great that he throws, and it's clearly intentional. And it gives that great through line. In some ways, he's kind of the moral center of this story, I think, because he doesn't change.
Yeah.
He doesn't have the tools to fix the problem, and he's never a part of the problem, but he's not like the other characters where they're all trying to go through this immense trauma, right? So you got Batman, the Riddler, and Catwoman. All three of them are orphans in one way or another. All three of them have been, you know, seriously scarred by their past, and they all go in different directions with it. You know, the Riddler becomes a psychopathic, you know, murderer. And Selena Kyle just sort of decides to try to survive no matter what. And she's morally complex, right? She's not good or bad, really. She's just kind of sometimes makes the right choice and sometimes really wants to not make the right choice, which is all understandable. Like when she decides she's just going to go kill Falcone.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, yeah, I can see why you'd want to do that. Guy's a real slime ball. But then, of course, there's Batman, who's been through this, and his answer to the trauma is to become Batman. But then what?
Mm-hmm.
You know, he starts off with, I'm vengeance. But then at the end, he realizes that vengeance isn't really the answer. It doesn't fix anything. It doesn't help us move forward. It's stuck in the past. So.
Yeah, I thought the three of them really exemplified like just certain adaptations and maladaptations to certain situations, right? Mm-hmm. If you want to dig into like the psychology of it,
let's go there.
I thought Gordon's character was kind of that consistent exemplar of just a man who is like you were saying, like pretty much overwhelmed with the situation, but at the core he had this kind of solid virtuosity and virtuous foundation that he was not willing to compromise, right? And I think that's why he looked at Batman as a symbol of that, right? This is a guy that's not going to mess around. He's not going to. He's deeply interested in correcting the corrupt nature of the city around him, right?
Yeah. He recognizes the necessity of Batman, even though he obviously, you know, he has second thoughts about it sometimes.
Yeah.
But
yeah. I think the Riddler was the opposite. He said, okay, he identified the corruption, right? Just as Batman did, but he said it's clearly not worth saving. The system itself is not worth saving. And Catwoman was an exemplar of simultaneously recognizing the corruption but taking advantage of it at the same time.
And also having no hope that it could possibly change.
Right, exactly.
Right, so she's another counterbalance there, in that both the Riddler and Batman are trying to change the corruption, but their methods are radically different.
Right, right.
So the Riddler thinks the only way to change it is just kill everybody.
Yeah.
And just cause mass mayhem. I guess I at the end there, I'm not real sure exactly what he wanted those guys to do, other than just, I guess, shoot all the cops and shoot the mayor, just to make a point.
Well,
maybe.
I think a lot of it is like kind of that belief, and some people are like this. It's that, you see the world around you and you're hurting internally, right? Because of your past or your experiences, where you're at in your life, and you see the world around you and you see it as just kind of blanketed shit, right? It's not worth saving. And I think that was Riddler at the core, is just like, burn it all down, just get rid of it. We need a restart, right? And I think Ra's al Ghul was a great example, even though definitely more eloquent and more philosophically astute, I would say, in some ways. In the Nolan trilogy, he was still kind of saying, okay, we've reached the pinnacle of the decadence and it's time to burn it down so something new can grow.
Right.
But I think there's a lot of projection in that, right? There's a lot of projection in that for Riddler. For me personally, right, I look at the Batman story and I look at the Batman mythos as equal parts a heroic tale, right? And we can kind of get in. I think we should get into what you were talking about, but also a cautionary one. And it's Catwoman. For me was, I think her recognition of this system or whatever it is not being able to change is valid in terms of that understanding. I think that it goes both ways in terms of what you notice and what you see, and kind of abandoning that and then saying, okay, what do I contribute to and how can I add to the net kind of positive? So I can understand like where she was at. But Catwoman really in this film for me was that like, it was very much the essential spark needed for Bruce to understand that what he was doing, it was not necessarily in his best interest, right?
Well, at the beginning, he's just beating up a bunch of, lowlifes.
Yeah. And
I mean, he saves a guy, so it's admirable for that, but it doesn't contribute to a larger change. I mean, he even says this. He says, I've been at this for 2 years and everything's worse.
Yeah, right.
I don't feel like I'm making a difference.
Right.
And, at the end, he basically kind of reflects on that and says, I realize that I got to do more. I got to be more than just vengeance. Which is a great through line. And Catwoman is definitely a part of that arc, and Riddler is too.
Yeah.
In that Catwoman is the one who points out that he, without actually addressing him directly, but saying, whoever you are, you got to be rich, which is like, yeah, okay, he was. Because, you just don't get a lot of what these poor people are, being put through. And, that was, I think, a turning point for him, his arc there. He's recognizing that and saying, yeah, okay, I'm sorry I said what I did about you. I misjudged you. And she's like, well, you don't trust anybody. I can see that. It makes sense. As far as the psychology and all of that goes, this kind of gets into what I think myths are, because I think Batman qualifies as a myth. It's gotten enough steam. It's been 80 years and we're still spending millions and millions of dollars watching Batman movies, making them, comics, etc. I think it qualifies as resonant, using the terminology that I've defined for that. It's grown into a life of its own. So then that means we gotta figure out why. What is it about this story that is so resonant, that's connecting to people and making them want to go see it again, see new versions of it, and so forth. And I think it's a culture myth. It's a myth that describes a culture as it's progressing. It's sort of like a collective dream, if you will.
Mm.
It takes everything, like the experience of the average American and all of the problems that go with it and all of the hopes and dreams and nightmares and everything else, boils it down into this easy to understand narrative about a single person progressing through Gotham, which is kind of like a stand-in for the whole country.
Hmm.
And that might seem kind of like stretching it a lot, but as you go, hopefully you'll kind of see why I say that. I think myths are created the same mechanisms that create dreams do this with myths, but it takes a lot of communication between people to build something like this. So like I've had patients who present to me dreams that look whole cut cloth from a folktale.
Yeah.
It's very rare for that to happen though. Usually I get fragments of that. And I think it's just because folk tales are built up over generations. They'll take a story and they'll add something to it or subtract and whatever, but the most resonant stuff endures. And then after several generations of this, you've got a story that is resistant to being messed with.
Mm.
So we've had so many retellings and rebootings of Batman now. Granted, it's only 80 years, right? It's not like Beowulf, right, which has been around for a long time. And now, on the other hand, that one, we're not sure if anyone would saying anything about Beowulf up to that point.
Yeah.
So maybe a better example of that would be King Arthur and the Arthurian legends. We're still telling stories about King Arthur and Arthurian legends, Merlin and Excalibur and all that jazz. And those stories are 1,500 years old.
Mm.
So there's definitely something going on there too, which that's a subject for another video, I'm sure. But Batman is about America, and it's about our battle with corruption and greed, and what began, I think, as just sort of a catchy plot element in which, to describe where this guy came from. Well, he was this really rich guy. His parents got shot in front of him, and he decided to become Batman after that, right? Mm. Okay, but every time it gets retold, the movie makers go deeper into that and get in. Okay, so what would that really be like? What's how does that actually work?
Mm.
Right. So, and this is when I've noticed that this movie is even more psychologically realistic than Batman Begins was, which was more realistic than the stuff that came before it. So it evolved quickly in the early days into the Adam West stuff, right? The silly, campy stuff. And sometimes that happens. But if it's got enough meat behind it, somebody will come along and say, let's maybe take this actually seriously. Let's see what this would really look like.
Hmm.
And so cultural narratives that turn into myths is not, obviously that's not a new idea. I mean, Tolkien made The Lord of the Rings partially because he wanted to build an English mythology. You could argue maybe he did do that. I don't know. And that's an example of one single person doing it, but he did it so bloody well that, we're still talking about it now.
Yeah.
A long time after it was written too. It came out in 51. But I think all cultures ultimately do this. And this is why, I think this is why there's so much drama and controversy over inclusion in fiction. So people get bent out of shape over, well, there's this kind of this is not being represented in these kinds of stories. Because cultural narratives, not to get political here, but cultural narratives are about us. Who are we? They're asking that question, saying, who are we? What are the things we are doing? And so when people watch this and they say, well, I don't see anyone that's anything like me in there, maybe I'm being excluded from that. All this, I think, is unconscious, right? It's just an emotional reaction, So that's a sidebar. I don't want to get you down that rabbit hole, but I think that in this case, the Batman is the latest version of the American myth of the American experience. This is not the first time this has been done. Right? The Great Gatsby is another example of a story that was meant to represent a larger American experience with greed and with all the problems with colonialism and the repercussions of that and capitalism and blah blah blah, all that stuff. And The Godfather was another one. That was, I believe it was deliberately written to be that way, as an allegory for America and what has become of us, and how we had great idealistic ambitions and became more corrupt and just power hungry and all that sort of thing. It's not a pretty picture of American history, but it is what it is. And that came out in the 70s. The Godfather did, when there was a lot of negative feeling with the Vietnam War and all that sort of thing. One ray of hope that shattered that was Star Wars, which is another conversation. But there was Apocalypse Now, and there was The Godfather, and there was lots of gritty, dark, and tragic storytelling going on. And then George Lucas comes out of nowhere and writes this story of hope. I think that's one of the reasons why it caught on so well. People needed that.
Yeah.
Right. So there's always got to be the balance. In this, I think they achieved the balance. Like I was saying before with Gordon, there's been versions of the Batman universe where Gordon was himself struggling with corruption, and he had suicidal ideation. And I know you're probably familiar with these. Frank Miller, God love the man. He loves to do this kind of stuff. Just go into the depths of darkness with everything. And I think it just gets ridiculous. It gets excessive when you do that, because there's no balance. It becomes nihilism,
Yep.
And so I'm not a huge fan. I recognize his influence on the mythos, and that's great, but I think he goes overboard. What was the story where Batman wasn't rich? He was this poor guy, and he replaced his teeth with metal, all this weird stuff. I'm like, what are you doing, man? But see, that stuff will never stick. It's not resonant. So, I mean, storytellers can tell stories any way they want to. It's what lasts is what we end up seeing and needing to try to understand.
Yeah.
Right. So the common element, the stuff that has stuck and has been resonant, builds. So I think that's why we're seeing these. This could have been a bomb. It could have been completely garbage. But Reeves and his team all took this stuff very seriously. Pattinson talks about when he puts the mask and the cowl on and the suit, that he feels the weight of 80 years of Batman on him, and so he kind of, I get that. So I don't know. I've rambled about this. What are your thoughts here? What do you think?
I think the best parts of the Batman mythos exemplify the kind of power of the individual and the individual's capacity for change and positive change in the environment. I think that is a very American and Western idea. I think the opposite, and I would consider that the heroic. It's just, okay, the kind of the foundational aspect of the West being this one that is against corruption and against and really for freedom, right? This very much for freedom. I think the opposite of that with Batman is the kind of over-identification of self-sacrifice for the collective. And I think that really comes out, it comes out, and I think this is why Nolan's trilogy is what it is, because Dark Knight Rises is not my favorite Batman movie, but the ending is my favorite Batman ending. And it's very controversial for a lot of people to hear that.
Yeah.
The reason is he transcends his trauma, right? He doesn't transcend it. You could call it the self-realization, the individuation process for Bruce Wayne is an understanding that he could never live up to the ideal of Batman, and that Catwoman really that need to be just a human being, right? And have emotions and have fears and come to fruition with a lot of things that were kind of suppressed by not only his trauma, that complex, but also his introject of certain cultural ideas, to the extent where it was so repressive and so suppressing and repressive that he had to kind of just be this ideal, right?
Yeah.
So it kind of it's an exemplar of, okay, yes, the power that you have as an individual for positive change, but also on the other end, which is be very wary of taking that on fully, right? But you were talking about the West and like this is an American mythos. I don't know how much you know about it, but Batman's story is essentially Teddy Roosevelt's.
Oh, really? No,
So
I didn't know that influence
yeah,
on
so prior to, I mean, Roosevelt throughout the entirety of his life was anti-corruption. When he was, in the New York legislature, he pretty much was known as this kind of fighting cock, right? He did not care what he said. He just was very much a man of his morals and his ethics and his virtues. And he, throughout his life, he was always told that he couldn't do something. He always decided to do it. He's like, no, you have a bad heart, Teddy. You can never exercise. He was crazy about exercise and physical fitness. His wife and his mother died on the same day. And he decided to go out to the Badlands and pretty much become, this Western man. And then returning, he pretty much was the great reformer who decided to fight corruption his entire life.
He was the trust buster.
Yeah, and I mean that was essentially the core. I mean, that was Bruce Wayne, and I think that it's at the core of a character. I think there is a lot of, I think the over identification with the need to do away with one's own wants and needs, because at the end of The Dark Knight Rises, right, he realizes this isn't him. Like he can't do this anymore, and he isn't always going to need Batman, but Gotham is always going to need Batman.
Right.
And I think that was brilliant because it's like, okay, you are a human being. It's time to just move on.
Well, Nolan is versed in Jungian themes.
Yeah.
There's a shout out in there. I think every other movie throw something in there like that. So I think he was well aware of what he was doing there. And, at Batman Begins, he says, I'm going to make a symbol. Mm-hmm. But at the end of the day, and he says flat out, he says, as a regular person, I can be ignored or destroyed, but as symbol, I can be incorruptible and I can be everlasting and all that sort of stuff. And so then he adopts this and he becomes that. But of course, the inherent tension there is that he is not that. And he can't be that forever. And this I see in patients where a very powerful character or someone they idealize or whatever it is becomes an inspiration for them. And the danger is inflation with that, is adopting that and not remembering that they're mere mortals at the end of the day, and they can't do that forever. So I think I agree with you, it's a great lesson that is at the end of the Dark Knight Rises. My only complaints about Dark Knight Rises, and really all of the Nolan films, is that they tend to be overstuffed. And Dark Knight Rises is probably a little bit beyond capacity overstuffed. It's just too much stuff going on, but it's a minor complaint, I think.
Yeah.
Even the great stuff that's in it. I mean, I just love Tom Hardy's Bane. He's such a scene chewer. He's great. He's kind of like the Penguin in this film. Whenever he shows up, you're just like, oh man, now what?
Yeah, right.
What this guy's gonna do now? And he strains credulity in a couple of ways, but those are minor quibbles. Now that said, this Batman doesn't feel overstuffed, and it doesn't feel dragged out either. But it's 3 hours. When I first heard that, I was like, really? That's unusual. Most of the time it's Hollywood wants 2-hour movies because you get more butts in the seats that way. It's all bottom line reasoning, right? Which is stupid. Mm-hmm. The 2016 Justice League proved that when they just trimmed it down beyond all recognition, and they came up with this movie that just nobody liked it. I'm sure it made some money, but the Snyder Cut just came out and blew it away.
Yeah.
Now that movie might be a little longer than it really needs to be, but I didn't mind because it was just fun. But this movie feels like it's just about right, just the right length. And again, comparing it to the Nolan films, I realized what I was missing in those movies was time to just kind of breathe and soak in the atmosphere. And this movie allows you to do that. You get to, you really soak it in, and the music is excellent. The soundtrack is amazing. Let's talk about that for a second. Speaking of the soundtrack, what is up with their obsession with Ave Maria? Any thoughts there? Why did he choose that to play 4 or 5 times in the movie?
Well, I mean, I feel like, well, all right. So to the degree that it's, essentially a part of Riddler's past at his time at the orphanage, I aside from that, I really didn't think about it all that much, to be honest with you. Yeah.
Well, this is the kind of thing that catches my eye, of course, and or ear in this case. So it starts off with that. It repeats it again at the funeral, and again when he goes to visit the orphanage that's all run down. And then the 4th time you hear it is when the Riddler, or Paul Dano, is singing it. Right at the moment when he's not telling Batman his big awful plan to blow up Gotham.
Right.
Okay, so but then beyond that, if you pay attention to the soundtrack, Ave Maria plays in a minor key whenever the Riddler's around as a leitmotif. I don't know if you noticed that. So it's clearly the filmmakers are wanting to attach that song to him, and the song was written by Franz Schubert. It wasn't actually intended to be connected to the Hail Mary prayer, but it did, and so it's stuck since then. But if you look at the words of it, it's a prayer for mercy from Mother Mary. And at the end of it, it says it's a plea for pray for us sinners in the hour of our death. Hail Mary, the Mother of God, is the last line of the song. So it's an outcry. Us lowly and wretched people crying out for some kind of hope from somewhere. So if you translate that into a minor key, which is what Riddler has done, mentally speaking, it's like that sense of hope or desire for hope has soured with him and turned into this nihilistic despair of lashing out. And I see the connection that you're making here with the Riddler and Ra's al Ghul, and wanted to just reboot the whole city. Well, and that's what Ra's al Ghul wants to do, but I don't think the Riddler is really wanting to do that so much as he just wants other people to hurt like he does. Like it's just pure lashing out and causing pain, like Grendel, right? Getting back to that. Speaking of which, there's a parallel here, and just like Beowulf and Grendel, both fatherless, but Beowulf picked a father figure to help him develop into a more mature person. Batman and Riddler, both orphans, both fatherless, but Batman had Alfred to help guide him, and the Riddler, nobody. Now, whether he had a choice there or not, they don't speculate on that. But it's again that same parallel between the hero and the villain. Is seen through that fatherlessness, which that shows up over and over and over again in all sorts of comic book stories. The kind of cautionary tale of children without fathers, it typically runs into problems, chaos, mayhem, destruction. It's something you see in the animal kingdom even, and animals that do that. Anyway.
You look at Catwoman's character in terms of her relationship with
her fatherlessness led to her situation.
And I mean that's not seen in the comics. It's never alluded to that Selina's father is Carmine Falcone. But I think that in this movie it was actually really kind of it worked.
Now that I do believe that's in the Long Halloween.
Is it?
I think so. At least the animated version of it.
No. So animated Hush, animated Long Halloween, they're all
a little
They all,
different.
yeah, they play, you know, they play with some stuff, but
Stuff. But I mean, that's what storytellers do. They play around with stuff.
yeah.
The process of retelling is where things get boiled down to their resonant essence and become more than what they started out to be.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So that for whatever reason, I guess that connection between Falcone and Catwoman resonated with the filmmakers, and it really works here. So we may see more versions of that in the future. That's how stuff gets retconned, you know.
And her direct experience with the father being this kind of very much this for like, I mean, at the very least, morally ambiguous, right? But criminal and corrupt.
Yeah. He tries to kill her.
Right, exactly.
Granted, she tried to kill him first, but you know.
You have on one hand,
but
you
he
have
killed her mother.
Right. You have an orphan who has been kind of stripped of any type of identification with a father. You have one that has a very violent criminal, right? One. And then you have one that has, fortunately, one that has been a surrogate, but one that has been very positive and influential in his life. Yeah. That's interesting. Those dynamics there.
Yeah. And the fact that the filmmakers also seem to be aware of that too, because at the beginning he says, "You're not my father." He rejects Alfred to a degree, and he teases him like, "Why are you wearing the cufflinks?" Right? That was a nice touch. I really like that. And he said, "Your father gave me this," as almost as if to say, "Shut up, you brat," because he's out of line there. He's out of line. He really owes Alfred a lot, and he doesn't see it, and that's what we do sometimes. But then he comes around, and he recognizes what Alfred really did for him.
Mm-hmm.
At the end of the hospital scene, right after he got injured from the explosion, and that scene is so powerful. It just gets me where he comes to realize the truth of his story and his father, and he's got to reconcile. All this time I thought my father was good, then all of a sudden now I think he's a bad guy. And Alfred teaches him, though, the truth, which is he was a good man, but he made a mistake.
Mm-hmm.
Being good doesn't mean perfect.
Yep.
Doesn't mean flawless. He can be good and still have made a mistake. That is an essential lesson for all children to learn about their parents. As children, we deify our parents and they can't do no wrong. And then once we realize they start messing up, sometimes it leads to alienation. And we think they screwed up. They're terrible. They wounded me, and that's unfortunately, I see therapy go this direction sometimes. And the therapist should know better than to do that. That is not how it needs to go, right? The answer is they were human. Right now, sometimes they are monsters. Okay, fair enough. But most of the time, not so much.
Yeah. Well,
overt abuse and all that, sure. But more often than not, it's just they have blinders, and that's human.
The idea for Batman needing to be perfect, right? And what that means for Bruce. So if this persona is this exemplar, right? This perfection, this ideal, for Bruce to then kind of have that kind of that realization that being human is not perfection, right? I think it's so important for the story of Batman. It's so important for the story of Batman. It's so important for if you are going to take any type of life lessons out of the mythos, right? Yeah, the empowerment of the individual and being able to kind of build yourself up to the extent where you can overcome trauma. But in reality, that ideal it's a continual propagation of said trauma. It's like that complex adaptation. It's a repetition compulsion with Batman. It's like, I got to go out every night, beat up criminals. I got to go out every night, beat up criminals. I'm not going to kill them, but I'm going to beat them up. They're going to be scared of me. This is how I'm going to function in the world. But Selina, when he's driving off, right, he looks in his rear view. That's what he actually wants.
Yeah. And that scene is so perfect, the way they ended that.
Yeah.
No lines or no words, but you get the pain that he's feeling there.
Yeah.
This, what he's willing to do to try to accomplish what he wants to do.
Yeah. Right.
And hopefully they'll I mean, you really at this point in the movie, you're like, oh, come on, can't they be together?
Yeah.
You know, and maybe they will eventually, like they did with Nolan's trilogy. But you can really see that pain there. You can't do that forever. That business about the self-actualization and empowerment is maybe one of the reasons why we see Batman over and over and over again, but not other characters that are pretty well known and popular, but like Superman, for example.
Mm.
Batman is unique in that he created himself. Almost all other comic book heroes are accidentally that way, or they're just like Superman, they're just born that way.
Yeah.
Isn't that interesting? So that must be the Teddy Roosevelt influence there. But even still, if you take that, Teddy Roosevelt didn't live in a cave full of bats, right? So they added these interesting elements to it, which are, I think, mythic. Batman himself has the feel of an underworld god who is a judge of the dead, like Osiris, right, or Pwyll ap Nudd from Welsh mythology. You can see this in Orcus and Odin and a whole slew of these characters that live in a dark place in the underworld, or they live in the shadows of the distance and all this, and they judge the dead.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So and the dead being because they are in the underworld, right? So, well, his cave is literally underground, and he's surrounded by nocturnal creatures of the night. He adopts the persona of the animal. And so it's sort of like a folk shaman, or a folk magician, if you will. In cultures around the world, where the folk magician, who is the expert in seeing into the other world, will adopt a animal persona, the costume, right? Oftentimes it's of birds, because birds are seen as messengers of the other world in many different cultures, an archetype. But in this case, it is a bird, sort of. It's a bat. So that's still pretty good. But the connection between that and the judge of the actions and the right and the wrong is in there, that justice. So it's sort of like taking Teddy Roosevelt's story and blending it with a god of the underworld. Combine the two together and you've got Batman. But then they take it one step further and say, but he's also a human being, and he's not a godlike character. He doesn't have superpowers. That's another really interesting thing about him too, is that he doesn't have any superpowers. Not unique, but maybe one of the earliest ones that was like that. He turned himself into a superhero with gadgets and expert martial arts and all that stuff.
Yeah.
Polo cash. That always helps.
Superman is I was a huge Superman fan when I was younger as well. Superman is kind of the biggest complaint about Superman is that the stories are kind of they're unattainable, right? There's a certain lack of connection with humanity, right? With being human.
I think basically a sun god. That's
right.
That's
yeah, and I think Grant Morrison's work on Superman really kind of squashed that, because it really just embodied what the human story and the kind of optimism of Superman and all that. With Batman, I would agree. Batman is this. I think at times, and I know this is going to sound kind of negative, but I don't mean it to be. I mean, at times Batman really can be this kind of discipline porn in a way, right? He's just kind of, no matter what, you can always do this type thing, and I think that can be empowering for a lot of people to hear. I think, but
it's not limitless.
It's not limitless, no. And
what do you do when you reach the limit?
Right, exactly. And for me, I look at the character, and you look at not only the character, the city that he's in, his rogues gallery, all of that, and you really can pull away at the kind of psychologically heavy baggage that is there, and that's not offered in Superman, right? It's just not there at all. And I think that's why it's so resonant with Batman, because it's a little bit more, I mean, maybe you could call it more grounded in certain, albeit the stories are very kind of bombastic and huge, it can be a little bit more resonant psychologically for people that kind of can grasp onto that and chew on it.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I mean, the answer in a Superman story, the answer to the problem is be Superman, right?
Most of the
And-
time, yeah. Yeah.
right. I mean, that's what you got to do. Just be Superman. The attempt to introduce more emotional and moral complexity into it, I think, was attempted by Snyder with his Man of Steel,
Mm.
which I really like that movie. Actually, I know it's some people don't, but I like it because of that, because of the fact that they recognize that this guy is so ridiculously powerful. We're gonna have to do something else to make him interesting, because just having a super big guy for him to beat up on is boring.
Mm.
So then they said, well, what is a world really going to look like if you have that much power?
Yeah.
Isn't it going to kind of suck? Because no matter what you do, you're expected to save the world and
Yeah.
everyone. And well, you're Superman, right? How come you can't? And they really nail that with Batman v Superman. And I think that the Snyder version, by the way, the extended one, works because you have Batman there as a foil. And Batman actually has an arc in that film because of Superman being a idealized figure of hope, in that he embodies that. And this is where Henry Cavill, I think, really nails this too, in that you see on his face the struggle he has. It's like, I'm just at the end of the day, he's really just kind of a regular guy who has superpowers trying to do good.
Yeah.
And he's, unlike other iterations of it, he's dropped into a place that's very much like the real world, which is full of corruption and moral gray and, double talk and, politicizing and all that stuff.
Yeah.
And also what happens if there's a Superman? You get worshipers, you get people who think he's, evil and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So I like that. But that's about, I think, is, somebody may prove me wrong, but I think it's about as much as you can really do with Superman compared to Batman, who is just like the rest of us, a human being. He's just got a little more drive than most of us. But I do agree with you that it's excessive sometimes. Like all I have to do is just try harder and fight harder. But the Nolan film and this one both recognize the limits of that. Like in Dark Knight Rises, Bane beats him up.
Yep.
Breaks him and breaks him and makes him realize you can't just fight harder sometimes. You will lose sometimes. And then in this one here, they have, at the beginning of the film, he's writing in his journal, right? I just have to push myself. I just have to try harder, right? Mm-hmm. And then later on, you see the dark reflection of that, which is the journals of the Riddler, which is just inane ramblings, but it's the same kind of thing. It's, I realize what I have to become.
Yep.
I mean, I think it would have been on the nose for him to repeat the exact same words as Batman, but that's really what they're getting at.
Yeah.
It's saying, Batman, you could have gone this way. You could have gone this way. So you need to step back and take a look at really what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
And in some ways, the Riddler wound up showing him that he was more powerful because of the way that he connected and inspired other people, even if it was towards evil. Whereas he was just sort of showing up out of the shadows and beating people up. And that inspired fear, but not much else.
Yeah.
Fear in the crooks. But what about everybody else?
Mm-hmm.
Right. So the Riddler inspires fear in all the regular people, and inspires action in the nutballs. And Batman realizes at the end he's got to inspire the regular people and continue to strike fear into the hearts of the wackos.
Mm-hmm.
But before he didn't see that piece, which I really like that arc here.
My favorite part at the end was when he was pretty much carrying somebody to that helicopter, the lift, and they didn't want to let go, right?
Yes.
Like no,
I love that.
And I it's just like it was, again, like the message of just human connection being what is needed the most, right? That relationship, right? Yes, you can recognize the corruption around you, but if all you're doing is sitting in your depression, right, in the darkness, mulling over, brooding over the decrepit, corrupted nature of Gotham, right? You're not going to really do anybody true justice because, one, you're not going to be doing yourself justice, but not only that, you could really add to the net life affirming positive, right? And I think that was at the core of that ending for him. But yeah, in terms of Superman, unlike Batman, Superman, it has to be, it's almost like a Christ story every single time.
Yeah.
That's what makes it relevant. Whereas Batman, it's not necessarily beholden to that because it adds the psychological dynamics of the human experience. So yeah, I think that's where it's a lot more resonant.
It's more realistic psychologically because
yeah,
you can adopt a persona, you can be inspired by these figures, but you can't be them. At the end of the day, you have to take the mask off, set it aside, and just be you.
Yeah.
What Bruce does at the end of the Dark Knight trilogy.
Yeah.
And maybe we'll see that here too. If it's resonant enough, we will.
Mm-hmm.
Time will tell. And you mentioned the darkness a bit. Interesting parallel too, visual storytelling wise, is that the very first time we see Riddler, he's in the darkness, but he doesn't come out of it. You just see him standing there in the shadows. And it's a little bit of time before he comes charging out of there and he, kills the guy. Whereas Batman emerges from the shadow into the light. So there's already a contrast there, but it's just barely a contrast, And you can see that they're close.
Yeah.
Perilously close to each other.
Right.
But Batman doesn't kill. I also love the way that at the end, so the child of the mayor is a very well used symbol here too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because it's basically his inner child. Bruce sees this kid, and you can just tell. Again, kudos to the actor. He has no lines reflecting this, but you just see that he looks at him and goes, "That's me."
Yeah.
How can I heal this kid? Right? He saves him from the car charging in. But it isn't until the end when he it seems like he's sacrificing himself when he cuts the electric line, but we already know that his suit is proof against that since he tased the one guy at the beginning of the movie. So a little bit of a fake out there, but it's still kind of a sacrifice, but it's more of a baptism because he falls into the water like a baptism and comes back out, and then he's reborn, and that's when he lights the torch.
Yeah.
He's no longer in the shadows anymore. He's creating his own light. Now it's dark and red and spooky because he's Batman,
Right.
But he's the one holding the torch, holding the light. And what does he do? He goes to this place where there's this infrastructure is trapping people there, and it's flooding. Shoves it aside because he's awesome, and then goes in there. All these other people are struggling. He's like, "Galloway, I'm Batman." I love that. But he comes in there, and the first person he saves is not the mayor. It's the little boy. If you notice the timing there.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then he saves the mayor. Of course, the mayor is not a character. She's a pure symbol. She's like idealization of hope embodied in a single person.
Well, she's actually afraid of him in that scene. So
that's true. Yeah, that's true.
He was standing there with his hand out, right? She wasn't grabbing it. The young boy was the first. He came out of the shadows, like. So I like what you just like that baptism, right? Where I think the hope of it is that, okay, clearly Bruce Wayne has realized that he's not recognizing that what he's doing is one, necessarily the healthiest for what he's actually attempting to do, but for himself, right?
Right.
So he had to go through that to some degree in order to get in. He goes into the depths of the water, comes out, and what comes out with him initially is kind of rescuing himself.
Yes, and that's what when he rescues the kid, he's rescuing himself. It's a theme I see in therapy sometimes. It's very common to have dreams about children in therapy.
Yep.
Because you're looking at a new part of yourself, something new that's trying to develop, but it's vulnerable. You have to protect it. And how does that get imaged by the imagination? It's a child.
Yeah.
That's what it is. And you have to protect it, and you have to nurture it and keep it safe from danger. And it's usually a divine child. It's got some kind of great destiny,
Mm.
so forth. I think this is something the genome does and says, oh, you're going through therapy. You need to start really focusing on something new that's about to come here. So here you
Yeah.
go.
Right.
Right. So if you cue into it, if the ego cues into it, you're in line. But he does this, and so that like solidifies his arc to me. Then once the mayor sees this, or I guess she's the mayor at this point, Bella Real, real beauty. That's what that means. So okay, it's cool. Then he saves her,
Yeah.
and so again, sort of symbolically restoring hope to the city.
Yeah.
Then all his activities later, he's in the rescue. And you don't usually see that part. You see the devastation and all the buildings falling over and all that kind of stuff, and then the hero flies off and says, "Yay, I won!" Like wait a minute, what about the rescue? What about all these people? Right? There's carnage and mayhem. So I like that they included that, and he, of course, where else would he be? Now they did do that in Batman v Superman too, when Luthor blew up the Capitol. Superman did stick around to try to save people, but eventually they sort of said,
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
got this covered. Superman, go do something super. But in this one, they really hammered home, and that scene that you're talking about there is just beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
An innocent person, just a victim of random chaos, and latches on to that image. So then he's seeing the power of the symbolism of the hero that he wouldn't have been able to necessarily do as Bruce, because Bruce is a recluse. They repeat that over and over again.
Yeah.
Falcone, so you're the only guy that's more of a recluse than me.
Right.
So, and that's a parallel there too, right? So you're just hiding in the shadows, manipulating things, and not, actually getting your hands dirty.
Mm.
Right. So, but that's an accusation against Bruce, not Batman.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and then Riel even says at the funeral for the mayor, I've been trying to call you and you haven't returned any of my calls. I feel like you could do a lot of good for this. Yeah. And again, I think that's an indication of where is Bruce in all this, right? Where is he? Why does he feel the need that he has to do what he does every night in order to repair things? And is it actually working, right? And even then, he, at the end of the movie, he said Catwoman says to him, "It's going to get a lot worse before it gets better, and the city's going to kill you," mm-hmm. Right? And I think, in essence, like that was the Dark Knight Rises. It killed Batman, not mm-hmm. Bruce. And I think that's it. But it's the idea. It is a very American idea, right? Or just an idea of this kind of never-ending story. Right, this never-ending through line of needing someone to be an exemplar of what we could be and our potential, right? Mm-hmm. And that being idolized, but that other individuals throughout history are going to attempt to embody that. And I think that's what Batman is essentially. It's just like that's the ideal, right? That kind of that. What do you want to call it? It's a symbol in the sky that equally strikes both hope and fear. Hope for those that want to kind of embody it, and fear in those that are that know that they're doing something wrong, right? Know that they could the potential for them to come across this in their lives is there. And like at the beginning, just as Dark Knight Rises might be or is my favorite Batman ending, this was one of my favorite, if not my favorite intros, because the guy was spray painting at the beginning, drops it, and it rolls into the shadows. I thought that was amazing. That was so fucking cool. But he is. I mean, that's the best part of Batman, right? It's like hope and fear, right? It's not one-sided, right? It's not like hope. Optimism is like no. The reality of the human experience involves both of those more often than not. It's like, yes, we can continue fighting, realizing that we're not perfect, and realizing that, the battle might not be ours to fight all the time, or we might not win it all the time, but there is going to be this continuation of it.
The later versions of Batman have, if you compare it to the old comics, really introduced Gotham City as a character.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
That is going through a transformation. At the beginning, they really emphasize this in the Dark Knight trilogy of Gotham being kind of a stand-in for the psyche
Mm-hmm.
of Bruce, and he's kind of like the ego center of the psyche as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
And in the sense too, as I think this is again linking into sort of the spirit of America as a nation, that Gotham represents America, and right now we're looking at it and saying, what the hell?
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's a mess. There's corruption, there's greed, there's there's this huge gap, widening gap, ever widening between rich and poor. There's hate crimes and just all this chaos and mayhem. We know, everybody knows that the ultra rich really run the show, and you got all of this influence in Washington with all this money and all that kind of stuff. So Gotham is a great picture of that, and it makes it even more vivid by having all of the trash and the chaos and the crime and it's drenched in rain and all that kind of thing. Batman then therefore represents a person looking at it and looking at our culture and saying, well, what are we going to do about this?
Yeah.
And there's another part of us, the Catwoman in us, that says it can't be fixed. Just try to, get through the best you can, right? Steal if you have to. Survive. There's other characters like the Riddler says, let's all storm the Capitol on January 6th. That kind of stuff, right? And then you've got Batman, who is traumatized, like so many people, and says, what am I going to do about this? And he does the best he can with what he has, but then learns through the process, thankfully.
Yeah.
Thankfully.
Well, it's almost as if, what caused his trauma? If not,
corruption, crime.
But Gotham, right? Really? Like, if he is, yeah, I feel like we can equal parts today say, there's so many issues, with what we have going on. The tearing it down is probably not our best option. Ignoring it probably isn't our best option either. Right. Our best option is to understand how we contribute it to within ourselves, within our own community, within our lives. Brooding about it probably isn't the best option, but connecting with people yeah, right. But connecting with the people that live next door to us might be a really good option. Right. And I think that's at the kind of cultural allegory in all of it is definitely there.
All the people coming together at the end of the film is an image of what needs to happen in order for the country and for Gotham to heal from what we are seeing as the wounds caused by rot and corruption. That, they don't explain where that came from, but they don't need to, because we all know.
Well, and it goes without saying, I think, but also understanding that context is everything, and the circumstances that you find yourself in, because even if, and this is again at the core of Batman, even if you do add to the net positive, right, down the line, there's always going to be corruption again, right? It's inevitable, right? And I think that's essential to the point of Batman as well, is that Bruce Wayne uses Batman, right, twofold to kind of navigate and try to correct and or ameliorate, heal some traumas, right? While also projecting those traumas onto the world and saying that, okay, clearly this, maybe there is definitely some relevance there given the kind of corrupt nature of Gotham. So Batman is all that, but it's Bruce Wayne isn't that. Bruce Wayne used that. Bruce Wayne understood how he interacted with that in order to not only correct himself, but hopefully add to a correction within his environment.
Thomas Wayne is kind of the symbol of the optimism of the past that has been killed. Right?
Yeah.
And that's kind of an element, an undercurrent in our own history.
Yeah.
For the last century in particular, Americans had this idea of being the beacon of hope and justice and right in the world, and that kind of doesn't work that way anymore, right? So it's as if our idealistic parents somewhere along the line made a deal with the devil.
Hmm.
And
Well,
got killed for their trouble, and now we're left with the aftermath.
but I that's what I had a like. I didn't have a problem with it in the film, but I thought that, you know, the realization for Bruce, what the Riddler tried to do was kind of demonstrably say, like, this guy was bad, right?
Yeah, right.
Literally cancel Thomas Wayne, right? And include him in this group of men who were corrupt and kind of used Falcone and Maroni in order to kind of, you know, get to where they were in these positions, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I think that Bruce's realization that his father wasn't a bad man, he was a good man, and even good men can get in, you know, potentially make bad decisions,
right?
Or I think Thomas Wayne was an idealist to the extent where he didn't see that Falcone was going to use the situation in order to pretty much corrupt him.
And the whole works.
And really. I think the tendency to look at history that way, right? And to say that, okay, well, just because our forefathers or the people that came before aren't perfect, we need to just completely do away with them.
Right.
It's pervasively negative, right? That's not, yeah. Mm-hmm. So I think that Bruce's realization and the acceptance of what his father was probably an underlying key factor in the film, which is to say, no, don't do away with the past, but understand that it isn't perfect. And how do you contribute to your present now while encompassing what came before?
Excellent insight. I couldn't agree more, because that is definitely something that is a problem that we, as a nation, with our own personal mythos, there's a tendency to want to just tear it all down, and replace it with what exactly? Pretend like we don't need anything like that, because that ain't going to work.
Right.
On the other hand, they were not perfect, right? The founders.
Oh, no.
Teddy Roosevelt and characters like that, inspiring in some ways, sure, but not perfect. There were things they did that were kind of, you know, sketchy. Carl Jung, same thing.
Everybody.
Who is immune to this, right?
Yeah, no one.
We're only going to listen to people who lived a perfect life.
Yeah.
The book of that is not very big.
Right. Well, and again, like, the realization for Batman that he isn't perfect. The realization for Gotham that their leaders are never going to be perfect. The realization for America to say this is it's an evolving experiment. How do you contribute to it, right? Yeah. And instead of pointing the finger and saying, okay, we're not perfect and we just need to do away with the past, it says, how can I contribute to bringing about something positive, something growing, something life affirming here and in the now? And I think, like, the reality. Like, it's interesting, right? So, like, Riddler was put in a position where he completely blamed his life on his environment to a degree. Bruce, his parents were taken from him because of the corruption in Gotham, but he still decided to, albeit probably not well adapted, right? He decided to go out there every night to fight for a city that took that away from him, right? How is that not like it? It's like now, like, okay, yeah, shit can go wrong and it can be bad, but how do you really embody the kind of the spirit of change and the spirit of the spirit of America, really? You know?
Yeah,
embody that now.
That's why I think these stories are so resonant, and they get people in the theaters.
Yeah.
And, you know, reading the comics, and what you told me before we started recording about the Batman basically being the DC property for the most part.
Yeah.
Doesn't surprise me in the least. There's lots of fun characters in the DC world. I love all of them. Right? I've always loved Superman, Wonder Woman, the whole lot of them. But Batman's the dude, right?
Yeah.
He's the guy that really just strikes at the heart of real feeling that we have in images. And it's very easy to get sidetracked by, it's just a superhero movie. And that explains nothing of its popularity. There's all kinds of superhero movies. but why are we telling the same one over and over again?
Over and over again.
Trying to
Yeah.
improve it and make it even more powerful and more, because it's got something to it already.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. And those that are kind of, oh, it's just a superhero movie. We spend millions of dollars on superhero movies every year. There's something there, and again, like it's indicative of where we're at now. I think I mean personally, as much as I am a fan of these films, I think that they are products of the culture. That if those, I mean, hopefully in those viewing this too, if you were to look a little bit deeper in your own life, it's a call to action for yourself, and not necessarily a continuation of just this kind of remote viewing, right, outside of it. Like these ideas are very big and exciting to watch, but at the core of these stories and why they're so resonant is usually because they resonate with you, because they kind of inspire you in a way to do something within your own life that is profound and grounded within yourself. And that's why we watch these. That's why we watch them. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. If you ask somebody who has recurrent nightmares, who, they wake up in a sweat and they're just shaking, and you say, well, don't worry, it was just a dream. Okay, how effective is that going to be?
Yeah, right.
Okay, it was just a dream. Thank you for that. But I'm still feeling it.
Yeah.
It's because the images and the affect are one and the same. It's the images, it's affect clothed in image.
Mm-hmm.
And I wish I could claim that, but that's Warren Coleman who came up with that phrase. It's brilliant though. He's absolutely right. That's what dreams are. That's what myths are. That's what these movies are. Mm-hmm. It's affect clothed in image. But the ones that really connect are the ones that connect to real affect. Mm-hmm. And we watch those and go, yeah, that was a great movie. I love the way the story played out, but stories are very fragile things, right? If you mess it up a little bit, the whole thing falls apart. So it's a great feeling to have one that hits exactly right.
Yeah.
Like this one. Final verdict for you?
I'm looking forward to where they go. I'm looking forward to seeing. I really hope that they do. I really hope they do Hush. I want to see. Edward Elliot was the reporter in the movie. I'd like to see Thomas Elliot, aka Hush.
Which could definitely do that.
Yeah.
Court of Owls is another way they could go.
They're definitely going to do Court of Owls. I know that for sure. That's going to happen.
That was a great storyline.
But again, like the city of Gotham being a character in and of itself, and if Batman's the ego, right? And where is Gotham? Where is it going? What else is going to be unearthed with his deciding to take up arms and really guide this unconscious where it needs to be going, or where it wants to be going, I should say.
Yeah, my final thoughts are that so far, I think that Reeves and his crew have built on the strengths of all the previous Batman franchises, eliminated the stuff that didn't quite work, and crafted something that's really, really special. I think so far it's the best Batman rendition I've seen. And for me, that's very high praise.
Yeah.
That would have been Dark Knight Trilogy, but I think he one-upped him a notch, just a little bit. And the things that irritated me about the previous movies are not here. And there's new things that he's introduced that I didn't even think of that work. Because obviously they really thought a lot about this and took it very seriously.
Yeah.
It's what you got to do.
Yeah.
So when we get back to Beowulf, we're almost in the same position, because Beowulf beat Grendel and Grendel's mother and is now going to be king. Mm-hmm. And so the ego is now taking over the space. Mm-hmm. So if that's any indication, we know what's coming next. The dragon.
Yes, indeed.
And your discussion about how the battle is never ending.
Yep.
It's there too. It's still there in that poem from 1100 years ago. It's great stuff.
It is. All right, Dr. G, you have a good day, and we'll see everybody next time.
All right, we'll see you guys.
All right, bye.